בשנה הבאה בירושלים, next year in Jerusalem. Over there in the...
Welcome to Theology in Perspective, the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Daniel Woodhead.
Welcome back to Theology in Perspective. I'm Daniel Woodhead, and I am blessed that you could join us today. As we're nearing the conclusion of our study in the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ, and we've reached a point where we're talking about characteristics and events in the Messianic kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of the Lord Jesus on this earth, running the government from headquarters, David's throne in Jerusalem. And it will be just as Isaiah said, the government will be on his shoulders. And we've looked at, and we are starting to enter into a whole series of discussions here about the Arab states and their hatred for the Israelites. Now, this hatred goes back to Genesis and the beginning of Ishmael and Esau and their feelings against the Jews due to their chosen position with God. And this has continued into modern history, and especially since 1948, when the United Nations gave Israel statehood. And there's one passage of Scripture that really summarizes this attitude well of the Arab states, and it's Psalm 83. And I have to preface my remarks here before I read this psalm. Many are beginning to teach today that this psalm discusses an invasion yet future to us and of these Arab states, and it also is saying this set of teachings, if you will, that these nations have never invaded Israel before, both of which are untrue. It's not a prophecy. It is just an imprecatory psalm by the psalmist, one Asaph, asking God, pleading with God to do something about these nations that hate him, hate the Jews. And that's what I'm trying to point out here. This hatred exists between the Arabs and the Jews. And we're going to talk about why, and we're going to point out the different nations, and then what God says he's going to do to them. So let me read just the first 8 verses here in Psalm 83. O God, keep not thou silence, hold not thy peace, and be not still. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee had lifted up the head. They take crafty counsel against thy people, and consult together against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. Against thee do they make a covenant, the tents of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, and Philistia, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also is joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. Now, the writer of this psalm starts out by describing a united conspiracy of nations against Israel. And these crafty people, they unite forces against the Jews, and they aim to totally annihilate Israel. They want nobody to remember the name of Israel. Well, let's go back a little bit. Nasser, the former dictator of Egypt, he repeated this verse, or the set of verses, almost verbatim during the Six-Day War in 1967. And the nations are listed by their ancient biblical names. Their modern names are as follows. Okay, let's look at this. Edom is southern Jordan. Okay, it's on the southeast side of the Dead Sea, on the east side of the Jordan River. The Ishmaelites are one of the fathers of all the Arabs. Moab is central Jordan. The Hagarenes are Egypt from Hagar. Remember Hagar? She was the concubine wife of Abraham, and she produced Ishmael for him. Gebal is Lebanon. Ammon is northern Jordan. Amalek is the Sinai Peninsula. Philistia is the Gaza Strip. Tyre is Lebanon, and Assyria is Iraq and parts of Syria. So all these nations are laid out here that hate the Jews. In 1948, after the UN voted to give Israel statehood, 5 Arab armies immediately invaded Israel. Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, which became Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq. Now, Jordan is Moab, Ammon, and Edom. Moab and Ammon are the children of Lot. So the stated purpose of this invasion was to push the Jews into the sea. In other words, genocide. There was a man named Assam Pasha, who was a Secretary General of the Arab League, and he declared their intentions. This will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre, which are going to be spoken of in the future like the Mongolian massacres and the Crusades. And then he said, what Hitler didn't finish 3 years earlier, the Arabs would finish once and for all. Didn't happen. A Nazi collaborator in the time of the Second World War, whose name was Haj Amin al-Husseini, led the Arabs of the former British Mandate of Palestine. And he was charged with the Nuremberg trials before he escaped in 1946. And al-Husseini actively supported Hitler's claim to exterminate the Jews in World War II. You know, Czechoslovakia was the only country that was willing to provide the Jews with weapons because God wanted them to survive. He allowed them to capture territory from which the Arab aggressors attacked Jordan and captured what is now referred to as the West Bank. And their true Jewish names are Judea and Samaria, not the West Bank. That is a derogatory term that the Jews' enemies have speciously originated. Anyway, including the Jewish eastern half of Jerusalem, which is now known as the East Arab Jerusalem. And Egypt captured what is now known as the Gaza Strip. So both countries murdered or expelled every Jew that was living there at the time. And during the 19 years that Jordan and Egypt occupied those territories, they called them the occupied territories now, neither country was willing to create independent states for the remaining Arabs. They called these people Palestinians, a group of people that never existed before this time. And residing in those territories were these Arabs that wanted to leave. The Jews said, look, you can stay here and become citizens, or you can go to your Arab countries. Some wanted to stay, which still lived there together peacefully. Some wanted to leave, which they tried to. The Arabs wouldn't let them in. And they left them there in these internment camps waiting to get in. Well, those regions were plundered, and they were just allowed to rot. Jewish graves were desecrated, and the gravestones were used to pave roads. And this is the areas in these Arab countries where the Jews were and wanted to come out and come back into Israel. And the Arabs that were in Israel that wanted to leave were not allowed to because the Arabs wouldn't let them. Oh, it was terrible. The Jewish homes were given to the Arabs, and most of the Jewish refugees finally got into Israel. In just a few years, they doubled Israel's population. That was the 1948 war, but the 1967 it was a 6-day war then, and it was no less aggressive. On May the 15th of 1967, Nasser, the dictator, or president as he was called, of Egypt, ordered a blockade of the Strait of Tiran. Now, this blockade cut off Israel's southern access to the Red Sea and beyond. And by May the 31st, Egypt had moved 100,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and 500 heavy guns into the Sinai. By June the 4th, Arab forces 3-1 on its borders outnumbered Israel. That was Israel's 6-day war, and was fought on three fronts against 3 countries in 3 overlapping stages. And in the south, Israel engaged and defeated the Egyptians. And in the central region, Israel engaged and defeated the Jordanians. And in the north, Israel engaged and defeated the Syrians. And in each one of these theaters, Israel gained significant territory that would serve as its own buffer in the future years. It's interesting, on the morning of June the 5th, 1967, the Israeli Air Force destroyed almost the entire Egyptian Air Force, more than 300 planes, in less than 3 hours. Israel's armored division, under the leadership of General Ariel Sharon, he launched a lightning attack on the same day. More than 800 Egyptian tanks had been destroyed, and thousands of soldiers were taken as prisoners of war. Nasser later acknowledged that 80% of Egyptians' Russian-supplied military equipment had been lost in the Sinai debacle. Finally, at 8 p.m. on June the 8th, Nasser accepted a ceasefire. You know, it's interesting. Excuse me. From 1948 to 1967, 19 years, Jerusalem was a divided city. The Arab League of Jordan had occupied East Jerusalem, including the Old City, since the War of Independence. The Jordanian troops had decimated the Jewish quarter of the Old City, blowing up its synagogue, destroying every vestige of Jewish life there that they could. And during the initial battles with Egypt, Israel actually notified King Hussein he had no intention of attacking his country. Hussein, however, believed Nasser's lies and joined the Arabs when he didn't have to. Now, when the Arab League began to shell western Jerusalem, the Israelis swiftly counterattacked with success. And paratroopers had attacked. They landed in the attack from the Mount of Olives coming back to the west, and they entered the Lion Gate on the Temple Mount from the east. Israel was really careful to minimize the use of artillery because it could have made their attack much easier with less loss of life. But they were much more careful because they didn't want to have anything happen that they could prevent to the numerous holy sites within the ancient walls of the city of Old Jerusalem. By June the 8th, Israeli troops were gazing at Herod's stones of the Western Wall. Now, that's called the Hakotel today, the Western Wall. Some call it the Wailing Wall. And although Jerusalem was the central prize, Israel also captured in those 4 fierce days of fighting the areas of biblical Judea and Samaria. And again, it's called the West Bank by the liberal reporters and the enemies of Israel, but it's not. It's Judea and Samaria. And these are not the only site of biblical significance. There's also the ancient towns of Shechem, Shiloh, Bethel, Bethlehem, and Hebron. Egypt's ally in the north was Syria, and from their heavily fortified bunkers and miles of trenches along the Golan Heights, Syrian gunners had harassed the Jewish farmers and fishermen of the Hule Valley there in the Sea of Galilee for 19 years. The problem for Israel was that the Syrians literally held the high ground, and their Russian sponsors had helped them to fortify it really well, with Syria also threatening Israel's destruction. The army saw an opportunity to end this threat to its northern citizens once and for all. So the battle for the Golan Heights was on, and it was difficult. This was not a desert like the Sinai, where the tanks could easily maneuver. And furthermore, the Syrians had planted millions of mines, probably thousands, but to deter any Israeli response to its constant shelling. The Air Force prepared the way by landing paratroopers behind the Syrian lines, and one unit of paratroopers actually fought on 3 fronts of the war in the space of 6 days. Finally, the Israeli bulldozers were able to clear the way, get these mines out of the way, so the armored units could batter the Syrian troops and drive them deep into the Golan. Syria accepted a ceasefire on June the 10th. You know, it was an amazing military victory, but the Six-Day War had casualties. 700 Israelis were dead and more than 2,500 wounded. And even though the Arabs never released any official figures, they were conservatively estimated that the Arabs lost 15,000 people. Golda Meir was the Israeli prime minister at the time, and she expressed the feeling of the Israelis well when she remarked, we can forgive the Arabs for killing our sons. We can't forgive them, however, for forcing us to kill their sons. They didn't want to fight. They also made the statement that the wars will finally end when the Arabs and the Muslims love their own children more than they hate the Jews. And it's terrible. It's been said frequently that if Israel lays down its arms, there will be no Israel. If the Arabs lay down their arms, there will be peace. But the Six-Day War established Israel as a major, major military power. But it also cast it in this unexpected role of an occupier, and that's been really tough for them to bear all this time. Israel eventually returned the Sinai to Egypt after another war in 1973, when the Egyptian President Anwar Sadat finally acknowledged their legitimate existence. He was then assassinated for this. My goodness. Israel remains in control of the Golan Heights, and it's unwilling to see it return to a nest of bunkers and artillery positions for the Assyrians to attack the Jews. On the other hand, Israel is still under a great deal of pressure to return most of the West Bank, those areas of biblical Judea and Samaria. Now, there's a couple other prophets that I want to bring out here that point out this perpetual hatred of the Arabs towards the Jews. Ezekiel 35, verses 1 to 5 say, "Moreover, the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Mount Seir, and prophesy against it, and say unto it, Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I am against thee, O Mount Seir, and I will stretch out my hand against thee, and I will make thee a desolation and an astonishment, and I will lay thy cities waste, and thou shalt be desolate. And thou shalt know that I am Jehovah, because thou hast had a perpetual enmity, and hast given over the children of Israel to the power of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time of the iniquity of the end." Now, Mount Seir is a long mountain range that overlooks Edom. Remember, southern Jordan on the southeast side of the Dead Sea. It overlooks Edom, where Esau's descendants settled. Esau, remember now, was Jacob's brother. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. They're twin brothers. Ezekiel prophesies a judgment against Edom, making it desolate because of its hatred of Israel. Edom turned over Jewish escapees to the Babylonians, even though Edom was subjugated by Babylon. Obadiah, the little teeny book of Obadiah, speaks of this hatred. Look what verses 10 to 14, and there's only one chapter in Obadiah, but verses 10 to 14 say, "For the violence done to thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that strangers carried away his substance, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem. Even thou wast one of them, but look not thou on the day of thy brother, in the day of his disaster, and rejoice not over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither speak proudly in the day of distress. Enter not into the gate of thy people in the day of their calamity. Yea, look not thou upon their affliction in the day of their calamity. Neither lay ye hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. And stand thou not in the crossway to cut off those that escape. And deliver not up those of his that remain in the day of distress. So the passage speaks of a time just preceding the Babylonian destruction of Israel, which is 586 BC, when the Edomites looked the other way. They just looked the other way and they helped the Babylonians when the destruction happened. In order to determine the position of the Arab states in the kingdom that's coming yet, we have to consider their perpetual hatred of the Jews. God will always extract his vengeance. Look what Deuteronomy 32:43 says. Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people. This will fulfill one segment of the covenant God made with Abraham. And what was that? One segment of that covenant, Genesis 12:3 says, and I will bless them that bless thee, and him that curseth thee will I curse, and in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So God's going to use two principles to determine the future of the individual Arab states: the history and the degree of their anti-Jewishness, or anti-Semitism as some call it, and how closely they're related to Israel by blood. Finally, peace is going to come between these individual states and Israel in three different forms here: by means of an occupation, destruction, and conversion. The scriptures provide a lot of detail on the disposition of the individual Arab states. They are Lebanon, Jordan, Edom is southern Jordan, Moab is central Jordan, and Ammon is northern Jordan. Remember, Moab and Ammon are the sons of Lot. Egypt, Assyria, Kedar, and Hazor are Saudi Arabia, and Elam, which is Persia or Iran today. And finally, there's going to be two desolate spots in the kingdom. They're Babylon, which is southern Iraq, and Edom, which is southern Jordan. And we're going to look at the individual Arab states starting today. And we're going to look at this, the Gentiles in the millennium. You know, we looked at the Jews in the millennium. We're looking at the Gentiles in the millennium now. And we're going to look at the disposition of the Arab states. We'll start it today. And in our next session, we'll look at it in greater detail and add more. God is going to use two principles to determine their outcome, their perpetual outcome. How anti-Semitic have they been? How anti-Jewish have they been? And again, how closely are they related by blood? And peace is going to come in these three ways: occupation, destruction, conversion. Okay? Now, let's look at Lebanon. Peace is going to come between Lebanon and Israel through occupation. And we can see that there are several facts contained in the scripture. Ezekiel 47:13 all the way through to 48:29 discusses the boundaries of millennial Israel. And Israel encompasses all of present-day Lebanon. God promised it to the Jews as part of the Abrahamic covenant. And so far to date, they've never had that piece of the promise to call Israel. It's going to be settled by some of the northern Jewish tribes, and as a result, there's going to be no nation called Lebanon in the millennial kingdom. No nation called Lebanon. Now then there's Jordan. Modern Jordan, again, includes the ancient countries of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and each of these have three separate destinies. So we look at them separately. Edom, which is modern southern Jordan, is located, again, Mount Seir. And the prophets have discussed that the peace that's going to come between these two nations is through destruction. Through destruction. There are 6 passages of Scripture that speak of this particular arrangement. Ezekiel 35, verses 6 to 9 says, Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord Jehovah, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee, since thou hast not hated blood, therefore blood shall pursue thee. Thus will I make Mount Seir an astonishment and a desolation, and I will cut off from it him that passeth through and him that returneth. And I will fill its mountains with its slain, and thy hills, and in thy valleys, and in all thy watercourses shall thou fall that art slain with the sword. And I will make thee a perpetual desolation, and thy cities shall not be inhabited. And ye shall know that I am Jehovah. Now, God is describing this massive destruction here with blood and dead bodies filling mountains, hills, valleys that are a result of Edom becoming an everlasting desolation. Jeremiah had more to say on the subject. Look at Jeremiah 49, verses 7 to 13, where he says, Now, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? Flee ye, turn back, dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him the time that I shall visit him. If grape gatherers come to thee, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? If thieves by night, would they not destroy till they had enough? But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places. And he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is destroyed, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. Leave the fatherless children. I will preserve them alive, and let thy widows trust in me. For thus saith Jehovah, Behold, they to whom it pertain not to drink of the cup shall assuredly drink. And art thou he that shall altogether go unpunished? Thou shalt not go unpunished, for thou shalt surely drink. For I have sworn by myself, saith Jehovah, that Bozrah shall become an astonishment, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual waste. Now Jeremiah, just like Ezekiel, is describing Edom that leaves nothing to remain of the progeny seed of Esau. It's talking about areas that are within that region, like Bozrah. Talking about areas there where nothing will be there. Edom had an opportunity to become a believer through placing his trust in the Lord, and he chose not to, and now the cup of iniquity is full, and Edom must drink of that cup. That's the Lord's wrath. Jeremiah adds to this in Jeremiah 49, verses 19 to 20, where a text says, Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the pride of the Jordan against the strong habitation, for I will suddenly make them run away from it. And whoso is chosen, him will I appoint over it. For who is like me, and who will appoint me a time? And who is the shepherd that will stand before me? Therefore, hear ye the counsel of Jehovah. He that hath taken against Edom and his purposes, that he hath purposed against the inhabitants of Teman, surely they shall drag them away, even the little ones of the flock. Surely he shall make their habitation desolate over them. Now that section of Jeremiah just adds that the total destruction is going to be through a war and a military conflict. Well, God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session.
We hope you have been blessed by this message today on a contemporarily relevant Bible topic. Dr. Woodhead has been teaching the Bible for 25 years. He is a pastor, an author, and conference speaker on various biblical subjects. Dr. Woodhead is the Dean of the Jewish Studies School at Schofield Seminary. His seminary teaching includes the Old Testament and Biblical Hebrew. He has attended Hebrew University in Jerusalem and a Hebrew College in Massachusetts. If you would like a DVD of today's program, please write us at Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan 49420. Again, that's Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan 49420. Or call us at 877-706-2479. That's 877-706-2479. Once again, 877-706-2479. The cost is $15. Let us know if you have any questions about today's broadcast. We look forward to providing you with continuing Bible messages each week on this station. God bless you.
Take us there to the land of Zion, next year in Jerusalem. L'Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. O hear, O Israel, hear. O Lord, thy kingdom come, thy will be done next year. L'Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Over there,